Welcome to the wonderful fantasy world. Subscribe now. The Mark of the Two Snakes, The Rebirth of the God, Slayer, Volume 1, The Awakening of the Blood Oath. Chapter 17, Deer Phantoms. The night wind in misty wastelands swept fine sand across the campfire. Aiden sat with his back against the petrified ancient tree, and the double snake jade pendant on his chest was burning hot. Mara's snake tail swept across the ground, crushing the last few sparks into the gear-shaped root patterns. These patterns were exactly the same as the diagrams of the previous Divine Throne experiment he had seen in the secret chamber of the Divine Palace. Get some sleep. We'll have to cross the gear graveyard tomorrow. Lily's voice came from behind the gear-shaped goggles, and the lenses were flickering with interference ripples from the church's signals. Aiden nodded but stared at the dancing sparks in the campfire. They refracted overlapping shadows of gears and snakes on his retina, just like the strange patterns licked out by the flames on his mother's back when she was burned 3 years ago. His consciousness fluctuated in fatigue, and Aiden suddenly fell into darkness. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in the gallows square of Rustland town, but he didn't hear the sound of the gear winch in his memory. His mother was tied to the stake, but the flames were not the orange-red he remembered, but the silver-blue unique to the gear spell imprint. She turned her head and looked at Aiden, a desolate smile on her lips that he had never seen before. And on her left cheek there were fine red snake scales. Mom! Aiden rushed forward but found that his hand passed through the flames and touched a fragment of cold snake scale armor. The surface of the fragment was engraved with pre-era characters, exactly the same as the remaining pages of Vera's diary he had seen in the library of the Divine Palace. His mother's voice seeped out from the fragment, mixed with the low humming of turning gears. Aiden, your father, used Lauren's gear spell, imprint technology, to delay my petrification. The scene suddenly distorted. The stake turned into the gear core of the Divine Palace, and his mother's body turned into a stream of spiritual vein light, coiling around the giant gear. Aiden saw that the double snake mark in the middle of her back was cracking, and the silver snake gear patterns and the red snake spiritual veins were devouring each other. Deep in the gear core, Lauren's mechanical palm was pressing on the eternal silence core, with a bitterness on his lips different from what Aiden remembered. An expression Lauren had never shown during the confrontation of the two snakes in Chapter 5 of the prequel. "This isn't real, ... double quotes. Aiden covered his blood-red eyes but saw an even clearer scene. Under his mother's snake-scale armor, gear-shaped blood vessels were faintly visible under her skin, exactly in line with the records of failed symbiotes in the previous Divine Throne experiment. When she turned around, the fragments of the armor pieced together into the shape of Vera's snake-headed sword, and there were still undried blood beads on the blade, the bloodstains from Vera's last battle before petrification in Chapter 9 of the prequel. Aiden. Lily's voice penetrated the dream. He woke up with a start and found that his left arm was covered with semi-transparent snake scales, glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Between the scales, the patterns of silver snake gears were flowing. The campfire had long since gone out, and Mara was using a red snake pottery cup to catch the blood beads seeping from his arm. The blood pattern at the bottom of the pottery cup suddenly lit up, exactly the same as the spell imprint of the spiritual vein ceremony in Chapter 2 of the prequel. It's the resonance of the blood of the two snakes. Mara's snake tail coiled around the pottery cup, and the double snake mark on Aiden's chest was reflected on the cup wall, now showing an alternating red and silver form. There are fragments of Vera's spiritual vein crystal hidden in your mother's blood, just as Lauren's consciousness is hidden in the core of the Divine Throne. Aiden stared at his arm. The snake scales were fading at a visible speed, leaving only faint gear-shaped red marks. He touched the gear pocket watch on his waist, and new details suddenly emerged in the photo inside the watch cover. On his mother's left ring finger, she was wearing a gear ring engraved with the embryonic form of two snakes, exactly the same as the wedding ring of Lauren he had found in the secret chamber of the Divine Palace. That day in the Divine Palace, Lily leaned closer, and the goggles reflected the starry sky. Your father's war puppet said that your mother was Vera's vessel. Now it seems that she not only carried the spiritual veins, but also inherited some snake tribe characteristics. She brought up the data stolen from the church's database. The records of the previous Divine Throne experiment show that Vera once created symbiotic vessels with spiritual veins to cultivate the blood of the two snakes in humans. Aiden's fingertips traced the snake scale armor of his mother in the photo and suddenly remembered the old mechanic he had seen in the Gear Black Market in Chapter 3. The man had stroked his wrench and said, "The mistress of the Blood Oath blacksmith shop used to pray to the gears late at night." There was the outline of a snake tail in her shadow. Now that he thought about it, it wasn't an illusion, but his mother's struggle to control the spiritual vein symbiote. The gears of the pocket watch suddenly reversed, making the beeping sound of energy overload in the previous Divine Throne experiment. Aiden's blood, red eyes activated uncontrollably, and he saw that there were 2 more gear cracks above Lily's head than 3 hours ago. And in the projection of her memory, a scene flashed where his mother stuffed a fragment of the snake scale armor into the pocket watch. Is this a relic from before Vera was petrified in Chapter 9 of the prequel? He pressed Lily's shoulder, his voice trembling. More precisely, it's the materialized product of her spiritual veins. Lily brought up the spectral analysis. The energy frequency of the armor fragment is exactly the same as that of your double snake mark, as if Vera specifically created a symbiotic interface for your mother. She pointed at the snake scales of his mother in the photo. These scales can independently absorb residual spiritual veins, with the same principle as the gear roots in the misty wasteland. Aiden suddenly remembered the vision he had seen in the secret room of the ancient tree in Chapter 8. Vera handed the jade pendant to a human male whose blacksmith apron was covered with gear oil stains. Now he finally realized that the male was his grandfather, and as a half-human and half-snake, his mother had long been chosen as the carrier of the blood of the two snakes. When the church burned her, the alien spy characteristics they saw were just the protection mechanism activated by Vera's spiritual veins. So she exposed herself on purpose to make the church think that the blood of the two snakes was cut off. Aiden clenched the jade pendant as fragmented memories pieced together in his mind. His father deliberately lost the remaining pages of the log during the escape, and his mother deliberately showed her snake scales on the stake. All these were to make the church believe that the vessel with the mark of the two snakes had been destroyed. Mara suddenly let out a low chant, and the blood beads in the pottery cup showed a scene of a struggle between gears and snakes. "Your body is rejecting the silver snake gears." She stared at the red mark on Aiden's arm. Just as Vera resisted Lauren's mechanical transformation 100 years ago. But don't forget, your father once used the gear spell imprint technology to stabilize her spiritual veins ... The pointer of the pocket watch suddenly pointed due north, the direction of the gear graveyard, and also the place where his father left the last clue in Chapter 14 of the prequel. Aiden stood up, and the fragment of the snake scale armor was hot in his palm, resonating with the jade pendant. He saw over the gear graveyard countless gear-shaped spiritual vein afterimages were gathering, forming the same snake-headed form as his mother's afterimage. Lily prepared the detector. Aiden tore off the tattered cuff, revealing the semi-transparent scales. "I'm going to the graveyard to find my father's workbench. If my mother's symbiote technology comes from the previous Divine Throne experiment, there should be the key to preventing the rejection reaction." The three of them arrived at the gear graveyard before dawn. Millions of gears engraved with names were floating in the morning mist. Aiden's blood, red eyes swept over them, and he found that the cracks in each gear corresponded to a failure in the previous Divine Throne experiment. When he placed his palm on the gear engraved with Irene Blood Oath, the gear suddenly roared like a heartbeat, exactly the same as the sound of his mother's mechanical prosthesis turning in his memory. "Found it!" Lily held up half a gear in the ruins, engraved with his father's handwriting. "Reconstruct the spiritual vein circuit with Lauren's gear spell imprint code to delay the petrification process. To Irene, my double snake bride." On the back of the gear was a pattern where his mother's blood fingerprint and Vera's snake-shaped mark overlapped. Aiden's vision blurred. He finally understood that what his father left was not just the double snake jade pendant, but also the unfinished symbiosis technology of Lauren and Vera in the previous Divine Throne experiment. His mother's sacrifice was not accidental, but part of a century-spanning plan to let a vessel with human emotions control the mark of the two snakes, with love instead of hatred. Aiden, Mara suddenly pointed at the sky. "Your mark." He looked down. The double snake mark on his chest was absorbing the residual spiritual veins in the graveyard. The red snake and silver snake patterns were truly intertwined for the first time, forming an energy field similar to that during the duel of the two snakes in Chapter 8 of the prequel. And in the center of the mark, the lip, shape of his mother before her death, emerged. Be a bridge, not a weapon. From the depths of the gear graveyard came an abnormal sound of turning gears. Aiden's blood-red eyes caught a familiar figure in a blacksmith apron among the countless gear afterimages. It was the afterimage of his father, putting a gear into a time capsule. The surface of the capsule was engraved with, "For Aiden, when the snake scales and gears resonate, look for the gear furnace behind the Stargate." When the morning mist dissipated, Aiden's arm had returned to normal, with only the gear-shaped red mark remaining on his wrist as a new mark of the blood of the two snakes. He embedded the fragment of his mother's snake scale armor into the jade pendant and found that on the inner side of the fragment was engraved Vera's last words. The fusion of gears and blood. Pain is an inevitable path, but the end is not destruction but symbiosis. On the way back, Lily suddenly pointed at the abnormal signal on her goggles. The Silver Snake Order of the Church is gathering. Their fleet coordinates? ... double quotes. Her voice stopped abruptly because the signal source was exactly the depths of the gear graveyard, where at this moment, a giant snake, shaped spiritual vein body identical to his mother's afterimage was floating, with gears twinkling among her scales like stars. Aiden tightly held the snake-shaped wrench left by his father. The embryonic form of two snakes on the surface of the wrench glowed red in the morning sun. He knew that his mother's phantom was not a curse but a symbiotic key left jointly by Vera and Lauren. When the church's gear fleet cut through the mist, the gear cracks in his blood. Red eyes no longer predicted death but pointed to the unknown possibilities behind the Stargate, where perhaps lay the answer to the ultimate secret of the mark of the two snakes and the truth about gears and blood that his mother didn't finish telling. When night fell again, Aiden lay among the roots of the ancient tree, listening to the snake tribe folk song hummed by Mara. His fingertips traced the red mark on his wrist, and suddenly, he heard two overlapping voices in the jade pendant. Vera's tenderness and Lauren's vicissitudes, jointly telling the final truth of the previous Divine Throne experiment. The end of the mark of the two snakes has never been to slay the gods, but to let both gears and spiritual veins turn freely. The campfire flickered in the wind, stretching Aiden's shadow very long. In the silhouette of the intertwined gears and snakes, he saw the fragment of his mother's snake scale armor glowing. It was the spark of hope and the unfulfilled dream of the battle of the two snakes 100 years ago. When the first blood-colored leaf fell into his palm, Aiden finally understood that his blood-red eyes could not only see death, but also see rebirth. Just as the misty wasteland was reborn from the eternal silence disaster, just as gears and spiritual veins sought the possibility of symbiosis and conflict. That night, Aiden had a dream. He dreamed that his mother stood on the top of the petrified ancient tree, with a starry sky of two snakes entwining gears behind her. She took off her snake scale armor, revealing a human heart underneath, and on the surface of the heart, red and silver lights were beating. This picture told him more clearly than any log of the previous Divine Throne experiment. The true power of the blood of the two snakes was not to destroy the Divine Throne, but to let every life choose its own path in the symphony of gears and spiritual veins. This episode ends here. The next episode will be more exciting. Subscribe now.